As most of you know, and the rest of you have figured out, I love stories. And I'm going to begin this morning with another story that I first heard many years ago, and I found it powerfully touching and meaningful, in part because when I heard it the first time, someone told me this as a true story, something that they knew that had happened to somebody they knew. And since then, since it keeps showing up on the internet periodically, I have come to question whether it is factually true. But whether it's factually true or not, like every good story, it has within it this kernel or this gem of wonderful spiritual truth. And the story is about a little boy named Roger, who was a little over 3 years old. He lived next door to his best friend Tommy, who was about his age, and they would play together in the afternoons. And one afternoon, Roger went over to Tommy's house to play, and when it was supper time, his mom went to the back door. She called his name, called him to come in for supper, and she went back to cook, assuming he'd show up in a minute or two, but he didn't. So a few minutes later, she went back out, and she was kind of anxious at this point, looking around to see if she could see the boys. And she called again and waited. And just as she was getting ready to start calling a third time, little Roger came flying up the walk, so excited with a story to tell her. Mama, you are never going to guess what happened today. Tell me, Roger. Well, we were playing on Tommy's body tricycle. It's a bright red tricycle, it had streamers on the handlebars, Tommy's most cherished position. We were driving really fast up and down the sidewalk, and we went around a corner, and the tricycle flipped over, and the wheel broke off. And Tommy sat, and he cried. But I helped him. His mom said, "You did? You fixed Tommy's tricycle for him?" And he gave her one of those looks that children give grown-ups when they are being unbelievably dense. And he said, "Of course not. I'm only this many old." I sat and helped him cry. Completely unbeknownst to himself, Roger was living out the very core of that message that we heard this morning in that passage from Acts. And just by way of a little bit of background, when that story that you heard a couple minutes ago occurs, Jesus has been gone for a while. The author of the book of Acts, the book of Luke, someone we call Luke, tells us that Jesus has ascended to heaven in a place of glory. The disciples have replaced Judas, who's now dead, with Matthias in their starting lineup. The uproar and wonder of Pentecost is over. Remember that fabulous story? And people are starting to convert to Christianity. And so all of the disciples, Jesus' closest followers, are out. They're traveling, they're preaching and teaching and healing and baptizing. And things are going really, really well for the early Christian movement. And so today this happens. It's pretty much like any other day. Life's good. Peter and John are going down to the temple for the afternoon prayers, which they do every day. But unlike coming to church, when we come to church here in most churches, if you go to the temple at Jerusalem, you did not simply walk in the front door and have the greeter there greeting you and giving you a bulletin. To get into the temple at Jerusalem, you went through a big gate, and there was an enormous porch or portico where all sorts of things happened. It was a gathering place, and so it was where all the people gathered before worship to catch up with each other and share gossip and do the things that we do before worship. And it was where all the vendors came, the vendors who sold the sacrificial animals that people could buy for the ritual sacrifices. And so they're setting up little cages of birds and pens of sheep and things like that. And of course, you can't have a gathering without food vendors, so you've got food vendors with trays of honeyed figs, fresh baked bread, maybe some falafel cooking in olive oil. slaves as they come into the portico. And over on one side, with the little orange cones around it, was a place where the beggars were allowed. Designated begging area where they were allowed to sit, and as visitors, the faithful came in to worship and do their business and talk to people and stuff, they were allowed to beg for alms. And yes, in case you're wondering, this would have been the area that in Matthew's gospel, where Jesus comes in, clears the temple, drives out the money changers, all that stuff. That's where this is happening, but that's not happening this day. So this place would have been full of lots of people, lots of noise, lots of sound, and as they're walking across this huge porch area, Peter and John happen to notice this man being carried in by some friends of his. Obviously, he can't walk. Maybe they can see that his legs are twisted. And the first surprise in the story, in fact, is that they even notice him, because they come to the temple every day. And every day, there are great groups of beggars in their designated begging areas. Everyone has a story more pitiful than the last person. People are sitting around with twisted legs and bandages over their eyes, and every one of them has a terrible story about being homeless or sick and begging, please, anything will help. In some ways, not that different from experiences some of us have. When we go to especially big cities like Denver, Salt Lake, or even downtown in Grand Junction, you have people holding up signs declaring their need and their helplessness and reminding us anything will help. And it wouldn't have been surprising when Peter and John were filled with some of the same feelings some of us have, that sort of annoyance, why don't they go somewhere else? Or guilt, I can't afford to give money to all of them. Or just discomfort that we live in a community where we have so many people who are in so much need. But for whatever reason, they notice this man sitting there. And they listen to him as he makes his request, which is not particularly original. He asks for the same thing all the beggars do: money. Anything you can spare. Anything will help. But instead of flipping down their sunglasses like some of us do, or pretending to check their cell phones, they walk up to the man and they look him in the eye. And Peter says this sort of odd thing. He says, look at us. He used a particular word, atenizo, which sounds like attention. It means pay attention. Pay attention closely. Look at me. Look at John. Look at what's happening here. And the man must have thought that was an incredibly weird request, because they looked just like all the other people that showed up in the temple all the time. No one had ever asked him to look at them before, but maybe he looks with atenizo, with attention, to see how much money they're going to dig out of their robes or out of their satchels. And then the second surprise happens, and that is that no money shows up. In fact, Peter says, sorry, Charlie, we don't have any money. He says, I have no silver. I have no gold. But what I have, I give you. And in the name of Jesus, he commands the man to get up and walk. He reaches out his hand to him. He helps him up. We can imagine this man who we've been told has never walked in his whole life, and he's standing there kind of shaky, and maybe he can feel the blood coming back into his feet and his legs, something he hasn't ever felt, and maybe he takes some little tentative tiny steps because he doesn't know much about how to walk, and then maybe he takes bigger strides. And you can see him getting more and more excited. And finally, the text says he gets in between John and Peter, one of them on either side, holding their arms, and joyfully goes into the temple, and he is leaping and praising God at the top of his lungs. Wonderful. There's a third surprise in this story. If you know your Gospels at all, you know that this guy Peter is not overly with it in Jesus' program. Peter, God love him. I love Peter. I identify with Peter. Peter is the one who's always asking these off-the-wall questions, who doesn't get it, who doesn't get who Jesus is. And Peter has been transformed. He has gotten who Jesus is. He has gotten what Jesus' power is all about. And he's gotten it to the extent that he can share it with other people. I have no money. I don't have the thing you're asking me for. But what I have, I give you. Powerful words. Words that little Roger knew about intuitively. He knew he couldn't fix his friend's bike. After all, he was only this many years old. But he gave him what he could, which was support and love, and his tears, which Tommy needed. Now, it's easy to dismiss the Roger story because it is sort of cutesy. I think it's even easy to dismiss the story from Acts because, you know, that's nice that Peter and John could do a miracle and heal this guy and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't really seem to have a lot to do with us. I mean, we can't do miracles, or can we? Let's say that we are watching the evening news, and there's an article on there about world hunger on the national news. The reporter says last year, 2018, the last year for which we had data, over 815 million people in the world were hungry. That's 1 out of every 9 people on this planet. Or maybe we picked up USA Today last month and we read the report quoting the USDA that says, in the United States, some 50 million people live in a state of hunger, and of those, about 1 in 3 are children. Or maybe we read the Daily Sentinel, and it has an article that says in Colorado, 1 out of 10 Coloradans struggle with hunger. In Mesa County, nearly half of all children are on free or reduced lunch programs. 1 out of 10 seniors, and this is also true nationally, 1 out of 10 seniors do not have adequate nutrition. And we hear that stuff, we read that stuff, and maybe we go, it sounds like hunger is kind of a problem for a lot of people. But an awful lot of us can come up with some really good reasons to think, not my problem, I've got a chicken in my pot, or a turtle. I'm not hungry, my family's not hungry. Somebody else should take care of this. We can find these wonderful excuses. I can barely afford to buy food for my own family. I certainly can't afford to buy food for other people. Or, and this one is one I actually have heard, and I have heard it more than once, those families should be providing for their kids and not asking us to do it. And if I help them, I will just be enabling their bad behavior. We might think about this, come up with an excuse like, well, you know, feeding a few kids here in Mesa County isn't going to solve hunger in the state or in the nation or certainly in the world. I mean, you know, bringing a can of soup or a bar of soap just is not going to change these huge problems that really need to be changed. And over the years, the more I read and the more I talk to people, the more I think it's that kind of faulty reasoning that keeps us from doing what we actually can do. While we may see the problem and we may even want to do something about the problem, we've gotten this quirky way of thinking that if we can't solve all the problems, if we can't eradicate all wars or eliminate racism or get rid of all poverty, then there's no point in trying to do anything because the little bitty thing we can do just doesn't matter. But it does. Every one of us hear stories every single single day here in our community, here in this church family, in the national community. People will never know who are doing little teeny tiny things a lot of people would say are insignificant, and they're making a difference in the world. Peter and John got that. They couldn't give this guy enough money to build a house and get a job and do all the other kinds of things he needed to do. But what I have, I give you. And while what we may be able to do, you and me, may not be enormous or earth-shaking or glamorous, it is still what we're called as followers of Jesus to do. And we're not called to do it alone because God's in it with us. That's Peter's whole point in that little mini-sermon that he preaches at the end of today's passage. God is with us, and God also needs us to do our part. St. Francis, I think it was St. Francis said, and I love this, we need to pray as if everything is up to God, and we need to work as if everything is up to us. Because every good and loving thing we do matters. Every life-giving thing we do, no matter how small, makes a difference. Maybe it's just bringing a can of food to the food bank, or a bar of soap to the day shelter, or teaching one Sunday school class in this church, or smiling at one person you pass on the street. It matters. It changes our world. And it would be wonderful if we can end war and eradicate racism and eradicate poverty. But while people are working on those big things, we also need to do the little stuff, what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called doing the small, great things. And Mother Teresa talked about doing small things with great love. So I'm going to leave you this week with a couple of questions to reflect on as you go forth to serve. What good thing, what small, meaningful thing that matters can you do in this place, this community place, this time that we live in? I hope every one of us will go out of here asking ourselves, what is one thing I can do to bring more love and wholeness and healing to this world? Because I know that's what God wants for it. Amen. Let me give us a